Good morning. How are you all today? Uh, in my last thought for the day, I said I would continue with the haircutting theme, and I expect that if you listen to that, you'll all be queuing up for me to cut your hair when all this is finished. So if you want to book an appointment in advance, please let me know. Um, my diary's getting pretty full with all that, so get in quickly. Um, this time I wasn't the hairdresser. My wife Mavoreen was, and we were about to go on holiday to the Lake District a few years ago, and I needed my hair cutting badly, but I didn't have time to go to the barbers beforehand. So just like I had an idea about cutting my friend's hair, Mavoreen had a similar idea, but unlike me, she did a bit of preparation. Um, she got a book from the library called How to Cut Hair, which was, strangely enough, all about how to cut hair. And she also borrowed some hairdressing scissors rather than use the wallpaper scissors that I had. Anyway, on the evening before we were due to travel, she sat me down, put a tea towel around my neck, and began the operation. And it was an operation because I had quite long hair, and it was quite thick at that time. So there was a lot to do. Anyway, she held the book in one hand like that, and got the scissors and followed the instructions and cut around my hair. And only pausing, put the scissors down to turn the book of instructions over. So, but as well as honing her hairdressing skills, at this particular time, she'd started a small business making clothes for people. And the relevance to this story will become obvious. Anyway, we went to the Lake District, and on the first evening, we saw a cinema in the nearest small town that was only open a couple of times a week. So we decided to go that evening. Now I travelled up to the Lake District in shorts because it was a warm day, and so when I went to change, and but when I put my trousers on, there was no zip in them. I couldn't understand it. So I went to the other pair of trousers that I brought, and again there was no zip. I thought I was going mad, and so I called Mavoreen to see if she could shed any light on this, and she looked at me rather guiltily and said that she'd taken them out to put into two pairs of trousers that she was making for someone else. Well, I wasn't best pleased, but I decided that if I wore my duffel coat, which we'd thrown in the back of the car before we set off, that would temporarily solve the possibility of embarrassment. But when I went to get my duffel coat out of the car, I found that all the toggles had gone and been replaced with oversized football buttons. Do you remember those oversized football buttons? They were like leather, but like a football marking on it. And these football buttons were almost the size of a small saucer. Now, I may have exaggerated that as time goes on, and probably at some point they'll be like the size of a dinner plate. But anyway. And I looked at Mavoreen and said, "Are you making a duffel coat for someone?" And she sheepishly said, "Yes, I am." Anyway, after a few words, we went out to the cinema with me in my zipless trousers and toggle-free duffel coat. And it was a very small cinema where the circle seats were only one step up from the stalls. And when we arrived, the cinema was quite full and the adverts had started. And we had to get past people to get to our seats. And the seats weren't raked as they are in most cinemas. It was all mostly on the flat. And as we got in line with the projection room at the back, I looked up and saw my silhouette on the screen. Now, I was mortified, not just about seeing my silhouette on the screen, but what it clearly showed. And what it clearly showed was my haircut. and I looked like Anne Hathaway's cottage on legs, as if I had a thatched roof on my head. And I hadn't really noticed how it really looked before we set off, and I'd been assured by my Maureen that it looked absolutely fine. Now, I can't remember anything about the film now. So concerned was I about my X-rated haircut. And I quickly ducked down and found my seat and just wished that I'd brought a hat to go with my zipless trousers and my toggle-free duffel coat. And to say I felt vulnerable would be an understatement. And I can laugh about it now, but I didn't laugh so much at the time. Now, these days, many of us might feel vulnerable for obviously different reasons. And but that sense of vulnerability is real, isn't it? And vulnerability can be a two-edged sword. It's when we are vulnerable, we can be hurt or ridiculed. And that's what I was afraid of, being ridiculed. But it's also when we acknowledge our vulnerability that we can experience a real connection with God. And vulnerability in this world seems to take a risk to expose yourself. But it's also the path to the most meaningful experiences we have in life. If we've ever loved, we know we are vulnerable to possible rejection and hurt. But would we choose not to love? I don't think so. Vulnerability is not a weakness. When we build a wall around ourselves and not let anyone in to stop us being vulnerable, that is a weakness. And is it really living? Now, God made himself vulnerable in Jesus. Jesus was vulnerable. He was vulnerable right up until the cross. But you would never describe him as weak, would you? We have the freedom in Christ to be vulnerable before him. And our deepest relationships in this world are where we feel we can be vulnerable with others without ridicule. So how can our vulnerability deepen our relationship with Jesus? Well, I hope to see you soon. There won't be any more stories about haircuts, but I'm sure there'll be another story for you next time. Take care of yourselves and see you soon. Bye-bye.